she's only gone and done it again. This is one of the best books I have ever read in my entire life. My name is Beth, welcome back to my channel, Reviews by Beth, and today I'm going to be talking about The Women by Kristin Hannah. Now, if you haven't watched my other review of The Nightingale, then go check it out because that is another of Kristin Hannah's books and it is insane. So if you fancy that, go and have a look. But today I'm talking about the one that I keep seeing in all of the bookstores. Everybody's talking about it, and it is The Women by Kristin Hannah. And wow, where do I even begin with this book? This book was so good. I cried about 5 times. Now, I do love historical fiction and it's something that I'm wanting to get into more, and I feel like Kristin Hannah is one of the best authors for historical fiction right now because she writes with such vivacity and vibrancy and kind of almost an authenticity. You can tell whenever she writes a book, she has put so much thought and research into her characters, into the historical settings. She has the facts and she has the dates and she puts them in and she makes you cry. The Women is about the women who were in the Vietnam War. Now, basically this is set in both Vietnam and America. It is set into 2 parts. We follow this woman, Frances, who is grown up in a really wealthy background in America, in California. Her brother is enlisted in the War of Vietnam and then unfortunately dies very early on into his enlistment, and the family have to kind of deal with that death. And so Frankie is like, I want to do my part, I want to do something, I'm gonna go. She wants to join the war because she has medical experience, she's worked as a nurse, and so she signs up without telling her parents and then goes to Vietnam. Now, I feel like I didn't really know that much about Vietnam. I studied the Cold War, but we didn't really touch on Vietnam that much. Like, I knew about the Vietnam War, but I didn't really know about kind of the atrocities that went on over there. And gosh, does this book pack a punch, because you really do learn about the involvement of America in Vietnam and also kind of the atrocities that were happening from both sides. It's not just America were great and we did everything right. No, it is not showing that at all. It is showing the brutal sides of both sides of the war. Was this war morally right? Which it wasn't. And so she goes and she starts off as a regular nurse but actually ends up as a surgical nurse and is doing like really hard big things in surgery, you know, having to take shrapnel out of bodies, you know, having to do operations on her own sometimes because there aren't enough hands in Vietnam and the atrocities are crazy. The type of warfare that was there, it was completely different to World War I and World War II. This was like a completely different war and it was awful. Anyway, we learned a lot about the coping strategies. I mean, this is like such a hard job, but also the way that the women in the nurses kind of banded together, and there was kind of almost, you became a family straight away because everybody took care of each other. But the fact that you had to get used to death so quickly because everybody that you kind of loved ended up dying, and especially if you went out with an army or a navy or an air force man, you didn't know if they were going to make it the next hour or the next day. So it was really life and death over there, and it just seemed very extreme. I mean, the living conditions were extreme. They were living in mud, they were living in trench, they had nothing clean ever at all, and it was just like, wow. So she wrote that so well, and you really fall in love with Frankie and you get scared with her and you laugh with her and you feel all the highs and lows of emotions. Obviously she does find a bit of romance over there. You get sucked into this war straight away, and it is, yeah, I feel like because you get sucked into it in the book straight away and it's kind of like a bit of a shell shock, you can imagine how much of a shell shock it was for the actual person and the people that experienced it. So the first half of this book is incredible at depicting Vietnam and showing you kind of the horrors of war, but also kind of the heroes behind the war, the ones in the medical tents that I feel like sometimes oftentimes you forget about. You forget about the people who were in the background who are trying to save you. Forget about the paramedics, you just think about the people on the front line, but really behind the front line there are people doing just as important jobs, trying to save the lives of other people. So that was really, really good, and the way that this was written was just so compelling and just you really wanted her to be okay. Now, the second part of this book was the bit that really got me. So she finishes 2 terms in Vietnam and she goes, right, okay, that's enough for me, which fair enough. And she comes back home and she is suffering with PTSD, as so many people were. But she was going, oh yeah, I was in Vietnam, I was at the Vietnam War. And a lot of people in America were like, no you weren't. There were no women in the Vietnam War. And she's like, okay, well what was I doing there? And so the second half of this book is really interesting and something I had no clue about. She was trying to get help from so many people, and she was trying to get aid mentally and physically because she was going through so much turmoil and she was reliving all of these horrific things that she'd seen, and she lost this family and she just got thrown back into her life of luxury after seeing everything that happened. And she's like, I don't know who I am anymore. And she goes through an identity crisis and she tries to go for help at these PTSD clinics and these veteran places, and they're like, you can't have help. Why? You weren't there. There were no women in the Vietnam War. And she keeps getting told and told and told again that there were no women in the Vietnam War. And it's like, well, of course there was. I was there. So the second half of this book is really like eye-opening, because this is obviously true. This is obviously based off of real things. And then we also see the riots that are happening and how long the Vietnam War was going on, and kind of the perception of the Vietnam War changed. You weren't a hero when you came back from war, like in World War II. You were like, there was V-Day, VE Day. You were celebrated. No, you were spat on when you came back from the Vietnam War. It was crazy. And these people who, put their lives at risk were being spat on and yelled at and yelled extremities at. It was like, what is going on? I was part of a war that I was enlisted in, or I tried to help people, and I am getting blamed for that. So the second half of the book is like, oh my God, it's really eye-opening, and it's like, oh, I had no idea that this happened. Kristin Hannah does such a good job of putting in all the different dates. She is so good at interlacing kind of historical dates and historical facts within the fiction. Obviously, it is historical fiction, but she does it in such a way that she knows her stuff, and she's researched the hell out of this, but also in a way that it makes it seem real for the person at the time. And the thing that saves the main character of this novel is the women that she was with, and we see kind of how strong a female bond can be and what friendship can do. So it isn't all sad. I'm saying, oh my God, this is such a sad book. No, I feel like the love, there is obviously romantic love within this, but the real love within this is female love and female friendship. And I think, obviously it's called The Women, but that is so strong. And she did such a good job with this book, and I feel like I want to pick up any more of her books, because every single thing I've read, I'm saying every single thing, I've only read 2 books of hers, but each one I've just raved about and I think are brilliant. So if you can, and if you see any book by Kristin Hannah, pick it up, because it is so good. Her writing is amazing, and you don't even need to know that much about the historical time that she's writing about, because she's going to tell you and you're going to learn, and it's going to be eye-opening whether you know or you don't know. And I think she does such an amazing job, and she is definitely becoming one of my favorite authors. So if I was to give this a rating out of 5, it's like 100% a 5-star read. It is one of my best reads of the year, maybe my best read of the year, and yeah, it was incredible. So that is The Women by Kristin Hannah, and please, if you haven't, pick it up. It seems to be everywhere at the minute, and it is definitely worth the read. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please like, comment and subscribe, and if you want to support the channel, you can by looking at my Amazon links and also my Patreon channel. Alright, thanks, bye!